this module, we're going to talk about the motion blocks in Scratch. And you can access those motion blocks by clicking on the motion button. And then in the blocks palette, you'll see all these blocks open up. Now, in order to understand how motion works in Scratch, first you have to understand a little bit about coordinates and the coordinate system that's used. If you look at the stage, you'll notice that there are some coordinates, an X and a Y, followed by a number in the bottom right corner of the stage. And what that does is that describes the position of your mouse at any point in time. So as I move this mouse pointer around, you can see the numbers beside the X and the Y are changing. Well, what does that mean? The coordinates, the X and the Y are called coordinates, and the X coordinate describes how far left or right something is on the stage, and the Y coordinate describes how high up or down that thing is. So as I move my mouse pointer up, you can see that the Y coordinate numbers are increasing, and as I move it down, the Y coordinate numbers are decreasing. Likewise, if I move my mouse to the right, the X coordinate numbers increase, and if I move it to the left, the X coordinate numbers decrease. So why is that important in Scratch? The reason it's important is because the way you change the location of your sprite in Scratch is by describing a position, a set of coordinates that you want it to move to, or that you want it to move by. So with that understanding, let's move forward and let's begin to understand what tools we have at our disposal if we want to add motion to our sprites. So here in the blocks palette, you can see all of the different blocks. Let's start at the bottom, and basically what you have down here is you have a variable X position, or it's basically a block that allows you to know at any point in time the current position of the sprite, the current X position. If I click on this block, you'll see that it will show me the value of that at this point in time. So right now it's 0. So the coordinates 0, 0, you can see Y is also 0, describe the absolute center of the stage. If I move my sprite to the left, you're going to see now the X position value is -112. The Y position value is still 0. So I haven't moved it up or down any. That's why the Y is still the same. But I've moved it to the left, which makes the number decrease, the X number. If I move the sprite up, you would expect to see a number on the Y value that's greater than 0. And it is. It's 94 because I moved it up. So anything that's above the center of the stage will have a positive Y value. Anything that's below the center will have a negative Y value. And anything that's to the left of the middle will have a negative X value, and to the right will have a positive X value. So these are two blocks that we can use in order to understand the current position of the sprite at any point in time. Now let's look at this other one here. It's called direction. The direction block describes to us the direction that the sprite is facing. So we'll talk about how to change that direction. But right now, suffice it to say that this 90 describes that it's pointing to the right. Okay, and on that note, let's talk about that right now. So this block here, point in direction, this allows us to change the orientation of the sprite. So you can see here 90 means right, -90 means left, 0 means up, and 180 means down. So you can see that the sprite is facing to the right, and so it's no surprise that when I execute this block, I can see that it's actually 90. If I change this to left, now I execute the block, you can see that the sprite actually rotated around. We'll talk about how to change that, the way that it's kind of flipped upside down, but it is facing to the left. And now the direction, if I click this block, I can see that the direction is -90. If I want it to face down, he's facing down now. and the direction is 180. So these two blocks are kind of complementary, and at any point in time you can use this direction block if you want to find out the direction that the sprite is facing. So let's face this guy back to the right, and let's explore some of these other blocks. Okay, now let's take a look at this block. Go to XY. So we talked about coordinates, and now what this block allows us to do is to tell the sprite to go to a specific set of coordinates on the stage. Right now, this block is set up that when I execute it, it will send the sprite to the absolute middle of the stage, the absolute center of the stage, which is the position of 0x and 0y. So right now you can see I'm not there. If I click this, it'll jump right back to the center. Okay, and now it's at the position 0, 0. I can change this by, say, 100. If I do this, you would expect that it would stay at the same x, the same y position, so it won't move up or down, but you would expect, because this is a positive number, that it's going to move to the right of the stage, and there it does. Okay, we can also use this go to block, and when I click the drop down, you can see it will give me an option of what I can go to. So if I select mouse pointer, when I click this block, then the sprite is going to go to the position of my mouse. Now right now, obviously my mouse is pointing at the block, but you can see that it's still tracking the X and Y position of my mouse, even though it's off the stage, if you look at the coordinates there. So when I click this, my sprite is actually going to go to the coordinates that this mouse pointer is. And in this case, it's just going to go to the very extreme edge of the stage because it can't come onto my script area. So when I click this, you'll see, there it is. You can see the loop, it's moved as far to the left as it can. You can see a little bit of it here sticking out. But if I want to illustrate this in a more clear way, why don't we add a trigger here that when I click the space bar, then it'll go to wherever the mouse is. So now it'll be a little bit more clear. So if I put my mouse here and now I push the space bar, you can see that he jumps and follows the mouse. Put my mouse here, space bar, and every time I do that, he jumps to where my mouse is. Okay, so that's the go to. Another thing that's interesting here is that if I add another sprite, and let's do that, we're going to pull out this bird, and I'll put the bird over here. Now when I select this sprite again, if you look at this drop down menu, now you can see that this menu is populated also with the names of the other sprites that are in your project. So if I tell it go to sprite 2 every time the space bar is pressed, and now I press the space bar, he jumps right to where sprite 2 is. So you have a few different options there of how you can use this block. Okay, let's look at the glide button. Or sorry, the glide block. Now, everything we've talked about up to this point causes the sprite to jump to the position that you describe. But there are going to be times when you don't necessarily want it to just jump there. Maybe you want it to move there gradually, and you can see it moving across the screen. And if that's the case, a more appropriate block to use would be the glide block. Now, the glide block takes an X and a Y coordinate. Those are the positions that you want the sprite to move to from wherever it is at the time you execute the block. And this first parameter here is how long do you want it to take to get there in seconds. So if I execute this block, it'll take exactly 1 second to move to these coordinates. Let's say I move that to 2. We would expect it to travel half as fast to get there, or twice as slow. Okay, so now it went to the same position, but it took 2 seconds to do it. So that's the glide block. Okay, we can manipulate each individual coordinate independently. So I can say set X to 0, but it's not, so when I execute this, it's not going to change the Y coordinate, only the X coordinate. And you can see that will bring it to the very middle of the stage, but it's not going to alter the Y position. So if I have him all the way up here and I click it, you can see he moves to the middle, but he stays at the same height on the stage that he is. And likewise with the set Y button or block, it will take the sprite to the middle of the stage, vertically, the vertical middle of the stage, and the X position will not change. Okay, so that gives you even more control than some of the other blocks that we were looking at. Now we can change by instead of, you might not know exactly the coordinates that you want to send it to. You might know that you just want it to move in a certain direction. So if I want to change the X position by a certain amount, then I use the change X by block. So what this is going to do is change the X coordinate value by 10 units. Okay, so that's a pretty small jump. As you'll see here, it amounts to just a little step. And I think what these are actually amounting to are pixels. The screen is divided into very, very small blocks. If you really get your face close to your computer screen, you'll see little blocks on there that make up the picture you're looking at. Each one of those blocks or each one of those dots is called a pixel. And I believe that this number here is actually the number of pixels. So you can see when it's 1, the movement is very subtle. So I can change the X coordinate, I can also change the Y coordinate, and of course if I wanted to move in the other direction, then I would just make this into a negative number, and then I would see the number, I would see the movement go in the opposite direction. So those are the change by blocks. Now let's look at this point toward. I can change the orientation of the sprite. We saw point in direction. This will now point it toward an object. So I can point it toward a mouse, the mouse pointer, or to any one of the sprites that are on the stage. So let's start out with the mouse pointer. And if I trigger this behavior using the space bar, now when I put the mouse pointer down here and I hit the space bar, you can see he turns exactly to the direction that the mouse pointer is. And the same thing with the sprites. I can choose a sprite from the drop down list and I'll move this guy down here. Now when I hit the space bar, this guy's going to follow and point in the direction of the sprite. Okay, so this is another useful block. Okay, now let's look at these rotate blocks. These blocks here allow you to rotate your sprite by a specific number of degrees. So as you know, you probably know that there are a total of 360 degrees in a circle. So if I change this to 360, he's going to spin all the way around, and so he'll wind up in the exact same position he's in. And so when I do that, it doesn't look like the position actually changed because it will jump to that position. It's not actually rotating to that position. So let's change it by 10, or let's change it to 10 degrees. And when I hit the space bar, change it by 10 degrees. It's rotating 10 degrees each time. You can see he's just turning every time I hit the space bar by 10 degrees. Okay, now this one will do the same thing except in the opposite direction. Now he's going to rotate counterclockwise. So we can do that and he'll go the other way. Let's straighten him out. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's look at the move block. So what does this do? The move block simply moves the sprite in the direction he's facing the number of steps that are specified. So what this amounts to is basically the number of pixels, or the number of coordinate units that it's going to move. So if he's facing to the right like this, and I say move 10 steps, first of all, let's look at the, let's take a look at the x coordinate value right now. So it's negative 117. So now when I press the space bar, you can see he's moved 10 steps, and this value is now negative 107. So it actually moved 10 units to the right because he was facing the right. Now what's going to happen if I change the direction that he's facing? Let's face left. Okay. So I'll execute that. Now he's facing left. And now when I say move 10 steps, the same block, he's moving in the opposite direction because he's facing the opposite direction. So this block will simply move the sprite in the direction it's currently facing, the number of units that are specified here. Okay. So finally, we come down to this last block that we haven't talked about yet, which says if on edge bounce. Now, in order to understand this, we first have to understand a little bit more about the rotation styles. And basically, what we need to understand is that when a sprite moves, eventually he's going to get to the edge of the stage. Now, when it gets to the edge of the stage, we have an option with this block to say, if you're on edge, bounce. And to bounce means that it's going to actually flip its orientation according to how this sprite has been configured to change its orientation. And I'll show you that in a second. And then after that, it will continue doing whatever you asked it to do. So how do we change its rotation style? The rotation style defines what it does when it bounces. So there are 3 rotation styles, and you can see them here. And the sprite can only have one of the 3. Right now, you can see that this one is highlighted, the top one, and it's called can rotate. So you'll see that what we're going to do is we're going to move this guy. We're going to move this guy 10 steps at a time, and if on edge, he's going to bounce every time I hit the space bar. So let's see. He's moving closer. Now he got to the edge and he bounced. So now he's facing the other direction, and now he'll continue to move 10 steps every time I press the space bar. The reason he flipped and rotated like that was because of the rotation style. The rotation style that he has right now, which is called can rotate, says that when you bounce, you actually rotate 180 degrees, and that's what the sprite is doing. Now, this makes sense for certain kinds of sprites, certain kinds of objects, but certainly for a sprite that looks like a human or a cat or something like that, that's not the way that we're used to seeing these types of objects move in the real world. So this might be more appropriate for a ball or something like that. If you're using a sprite like this, perhaps you're going to want to set the rotation style to the next one, which is called only face left right. So right now we're going to click that, and as we click it, here you see a preview of what the rotation style does. I'll do it again. I'll click it again, and you can see how he faced left and right. On this one, you can see how he turns when I click it. That tells you what the rotation style does when it bounces. So I'm going to click face left right, and now we're going to execute the same script, and let's see what happens when he reaches the edge of the screen, the edge of the stage. So now he reaches the edge, and you can see because of the rotation style, he simply flipped to face the other direction rather than rotating. Okay, so it's the same code. That's what happens when he bounces. It's defined by the rotation style. Now the final rotation style is called don't rotate. When I select that, I'm going to see a preview of what that looks like. As you can see, nothing happened. So this rotation style, let's take a look at what it does in action. When he gets to the side of to the edge of the screen, now look at that. He bounces, except he actually doesn't change his orientation.